Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shiv Malik, and I am the moderator for this 15 by 15 session. I see some of you, yes, have returned. You'll know that, therefore, this is a pretty lively session. The speaker gets 15 minutes to talk and present, and you, the audience, then get 15 minutes to ask your questions. It all goes by very quickly, so please do have your questions lined up. There's nothing worse than a whole load of people, which is what happened in the first two sessions, wanting to ask questions and not being able to have the chance because they kind of waited too long at the very start of the question session. There will be roving mics on this side of the room and that side of the room, so put your hands up. We'll spot you, we'll give you a microphone, and then you can get in there with your question. And for those who use social media, I'm assuming it's most of you at this point, if not all, in which case it would be weird being in this talk in a sense. You'll know why in a second when I tell you the title. There is, of course, the hashtag that you can use. It's OECD4. We're in room 4, so it's hashtag OECD4. And if you post a comment with that, it will appear magically on the screen behind you. Of course, there's a problem with that, because if you do, it's not a feedback form. So if you don't like the talk, don't say that you don't like it, because it will appear behind the speaker as they speak live, which gets a little bit awkward. That happened last year, and honestly, as an English person, I was just like mortified. So today, oh yes, okay, hang on. Here we go. This talk is ranking digital rights. Today, the power of FANG tech companies. That FANG, that acronym, you probably, I don't know. Do you like that acronym? No? Shrug. Meh. Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. That's what the acronym stands for. I kind of like it. Their power has never been more pervasive, more visible, and more threatening. You can perhaps sense a revolt in the air from ordinary users who have perhaps realized that the unequal trade they've participated in all this time, giving up their personal data in return for convenience and maybe a few free digital services. In the meantime, these massive, huge companies can choose to support or severely diminish our digital rights. Now, digital rights is sort of a fascinating term, and here to explain what those rights mean and how perhaps we can strengthen them, we have Rebecca McKinnon with us. She also has, you'll find on your seat a little, ooh, not that one, a leaflet, but you can get a larger pamphlet with the study on ranking digital rights at the back of the room at the end of the talk. So, Rebecca, she is the director of the Ranking Digital Rights Project, which works to set global standards for how digital companies should respect freedom of expression and privacy. She has served as CNN's Beijing and Tokyo bureau chief and has held fellowships at Harvard, the Open Society Foundation, and Princeton. Please welcome her to the stage.
Thanks so much, Shiv. And thank you all for coming. I'm going to talk for 15 minutes, but hopefully we can get into more detail in the Q&A, depending on what people are particularly interested in. So, I almost forgot I had my clicker with me. There we go. So, it seems like a very long time ago, 2011. But remember back in 2011 when we were all really excited and optimistic about the potential for social media to empower democracy? Remember that? And now we've done a 380, 6 years later. And we're all very concerned with, of course, the more negative impacts of social media and amplifying hate speech, amplifying disinformation. So the question is, how do we move forward without throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Global platforms that are not entirely under the thumb of repressive regimes give an outlet to people in many countries that they wouldn't otherwise have. Yet, at the same time, we need to figure out how we can ensure that these global digitally networked platforms support human rights while not allowing themselves to be hijacked into instruments of hate and mob rule. So we talk about sustainable business for the physical environment. And I'd like to suggest that we also need to think about our digital environment, our information ecosystem, and how do we build and govern and design businesses that sustain the kind of information ecosystem that sustains the kind of political and civil and economic system that we actually want for our children. So are we creating an information ecosystem in which the rights of future generations can be protected and strengthened, and that our information ecosystem works symbiotically and positively with our offline rights? That's the question we need to ask. One framework for beginning to think about this that I have found useful is the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. And it stipulates, of course, it builds upon the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the two human rights covenants, that governments must have the duty to protect human rights, but companies must respect human rights also. And both have the responsibility to provide remedy mechanisms. And so it's on this framework, this idea that companies, particularly in our digital world, are an intermediary in between our public institutions and our economic lives and the rest of society. And how do we ensure that when power is exercised through these networks, it's done in a way that is accountable? So with Ranking Digital Rights, this is the project I'm going to talk about now, we're trying to address a piece of this we selected 22 companies, internet, mobile, and telecommunications companies, that when you add them up, when you combine them together, they're touching the digital lives of most of the world's internet users. So we took that selection of companies and we evaluated them on 35 different indicators or questions that examined the company's commitments and disclosed policies affecting their users' expression and privacy. And so this is, and if you look at the pamphlet and you go to the website, you can go into the data and delve into every single question. There's certainly not time in 15 minutes for that. But just to give you a brief overview, most of the companies in the index failed. 2 of them got what in American academics would be considered a D. But it's really just because they disclose more things about more things rather than that they've really got the best policies. So we've got a long way to go. We have questions that are in basically 3 different buckets. One is related to governance. So does it have corporate level commitments to respect users' rights to expression and privacy? Is there executive and board level oversight? Is there impact assessment? Is there grievance and remedy? We look at those questions. Freedom of expression is not about what platform or what service has the most free-for-all. It's about how is speech governed on that platform, and is there sufficient transparency about what are the rules and how are they enforced, and also how the company interacts with government demands. So there's something I'll talk about later called transparency reporting that we want to see. And then with privacy, we're looking at GDPR-related issues. Are companies being fully transparent about what is happening to your data throughout its entire life cycle and how much control they're giving? Is there sufficient transparency about government demands for user data? And do the companies show clear commitment and measures taken to protect the security of users' data? So that's what we're looking at in the index. And this is, again, an effort to really benchmark how companies are even just communicating to their users and stakeholders about what they're doing so that people can make sufficiently informed choices. So to drill down on some specific questions, in the set of questions that really relate to what we would consider GDPR, they don't map perfectly, but there's a lot of overlap. We're looking at how transparent are companies about their handling of user information. So in other words, we read people's privacy policies and evaluated them. And everybody's failing. 56%, that's an F, and it goes down from there. But as you'll see, Facebook's been in the news a lot. All of the telcos we evaluated were as bad, if not worse, than Facebook when it comes to transparency about the handling of user data. So we need to keep an eye on a broader set of companies. When we looked at how transparent are internet and mobile ecosystem companies about what user information they share and with whom, interestingly, a Korean company got the top score on that particular question, which goes to show this is not just a Western value. That when you have a society with strong rule of law, strong civil society, media independence, competitive politics, you have pressure on companies to be responsible regardless of the culture in many cases. So this is, I think, a very interesting case. And of course, even though Google did quite well overall because it disclosed more things about more things, it did not do so well on this particular question, which also relates to its business model. When we asked how transparent are internet and mobile ecosystem companies about options that users have to control their own information, at the time we finished the research, Facebook was disclosing less information and providing fewer options than even Chinese and Russian companies. And this had been the case actually the previous year as well, which was a real red flag for obfuscation about what was going on. So this is kind of part of my argument to say that watching companies' disclosures over time and flagging where disclosure is poor can flag a lot of other problems as well. Tracking users, only one of the companies we evaluated commits not to track users across the internet. That was Apple. Otherwise, the performance was quite poor. Moving to expression-related issues, this is a page that you might see if somebody's page is deactivated or content is removed. Sometimes you might see this error message on Google, and then of course this is a cute error message in Chinese on a Chinese social network when content gets deleted. Many governments, and not just non-democratic governments, but many governments in the democratic world as well, make it difficult for companies to be transparent about what content is being removed for what reason. These are two block pages, one for Vodafone, one for an Indian telecommunications companies. You know, many websites get blocked, both on government order, but also for many other reasons, copyright and so forth. And in many countries, it's not possible, the law makes it impossible for the companies to even report data, numbers on the number of requests they're receiving and how much they removed and why. And there's no transparency in most countries about what requests are being made by the government to the companies or by other regulatory bodies or quasi-governmental bodies to the ISPs. When we looked, this is across the board, 3 questions looking at how transparent are our selection of ISPs about their process for responding to third-party requests for content or account restriction. You'll see that there are a couple of OECD country-based companies, a couple of companies based in OECD countries that disclose nothing even about their process for dealing with government demands, let alone any data about the number of requests they receive, either from government or private parties. And we would argue that the need for people to understand under what circumstance their access to information or their ability to transmit content is being limited, is being restricted, by whom, is very essential if we're going to have accountable governance going forward. No one's saying that there aren't many legitimate reasons to block or restrict access to content. I think we're all very familiar with some good reasons, but when that is happening, citizens need to understand under whose authority content is being blocked and why. And if that power is being abused, we need to be able to hold it accountable. And that is a direction that most of the world is not heading in, with a couple of exceptions. Another thing we looked at, and this is again just a small sample of the different indicators in the index, we looked for transparency by ISPs about what happens when they receive a government order to shut down their network. What is their process for considering that government requests. Do they have a process? And then we want to see data, information about how they've been responding to government shutdown demands. In most cases, most telcos provide very little information about their process for responding to government shutdown demands and kind of what happens in that process. In many countries, that's because the government won't allow them to disclose this information. I'm not talking about the text of specific orders, just talking about, are companies allowed to provide some basic information about the fact that they receive orders, how they handle the orders, and how many orders they got in a particular year. In many countries, this is not possible to disclose. So again, when internet access is so important for daily life, and when you have many countries where government, sometimes regional government, is resorting to network shutdowns to deal with social unrest or exams or other problems, this is a real concern, the lack of transparency. So I'm just about out of time, and I only have a couple more slides, so that's good. This is a graph. Now, on our website and in our full report, we have report cards for every single company. So we outline exactly what they did well, what they disclosed well, what they did not disclose, and why. And we also identified what are the things they could disclose tomorrow, and what are the things that would require legislative policy reform in order for them to change. And very interestingly, 2 Chinese companies made significant changes between 2017 and 2018. They didn't change any disclosures related to government demands for reasons I probably don't need to explain, but they did disclose more information between 2017 and 2018 about how they're handling consumer data and with whom it's being shared. They disclosed more information about security measures and some more information about how terms of service are enforced. And so what this kind of showed us was that there is incentive, even in very challenging regulatory regimes, for companies to improve if you kind of compare them against one another in a public manner, and that stakeholders then press them on this. The other interesting thing in the telecommunications sector, the 3 telecommunications companies that improved the most improved during a year when they joined an organization called the Global Network Initiative, in which companies agree to make commitments to protect users' privacy and freedom of expression in relation to government demands, agree to be transparent about the demands they're receiving, and agree to conduct human rights impact assessments and be assessed on whether they do so. So we're also able to track the reasons why companies begin to disclose more information about policies that affect their users' rights. So just to end with a provocation, should we also start benchmarking governments on the extent to which they're maximizing the possibility that companies will respect their users' rights, both positively through regulations such as data protection regulation, but also ensuring that there are not laws that are actually preventing companies from respecting rights by disclosing necessary information to people for people to understand what's happening to their information, or possibly even using policy and law to violate rights through surveillance and censorship that is overbroad. So with that, I'm out of time, and I'll hand it back over to Shiv.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that talk. That was wonderful, and it was great to see those rankings there, and fascinating to see some of the results. Google coming up out top.
Yeah, which is a mixed thing.
Yes.
Because of our methodology, so we can talk about that too.
Before we get to perhaps audience questions, and if you do have them, do introduce yourself first, and also hold the mic up to your mouth, as I keep getting told. The gentleman over here has got a question. Great. Let me just get in there with my own question, if you don't mind. Has GDPR, that's the new European Union legislation, for those that you don't know, on how would you term it, on data ownership,
protection, yeah.
Data protection, yeah, sorry. It's in the title, Shiv. Has that created a new environment? Sure. for this, and companies wanting to basically not touch personal data anymore? Has it become too difficult?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and our research for the current index ended before the GDPR went into force. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how scores change by the time we get around to early next year, when we've really seen all the companies make the changes they are going to make. But
yeah, it came into force on May the 25th.
May 25th,
so that
just
was
last week.
Friday, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
Just last week, and we finished the research for our 2018 ranking earlier this year. But what's interesting to see is that particularly with some of the large companies, we're already seeing lawsuits about them, and my team have been looking a bit at the new policies and the new disclosures. And we haven't done a full evaluation yet because that's coming up. But quite a lot of the changes are fairly cosmetic in terms of just clarifying policies that remain in practice rather than fundamentally changing practices. So with Facebook, it's still not opt-in. If you don't want Facebook to share your data for targeted advertising, it's still opt-out, it's not opt-in. Although one of their lawyers might argue that, well, you're opting in for the service, and but there are lawsuits that are now challenging that. So they still won't get a full score according to our indicator on that question, because you'd have to actually be genuinely opt-in, and we don't consider the options they're providing to be opt-in when it comes to targeted advertising. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think that many companies are playing a legal dance in terms of, legally what they don't need to change. But I do think over the long run, it's going to give competitive advantage to companies that really do look at data in a different way. Whether we're going to see it from the incumbents, I'm not sure. I'm not so. It depends on the company, but some of them certainly are trying to change as little as they legally have to. But I think there is a real opportunity for new businesses to say, look, we're treating your data as your asset that you own, and we're coming to the table as a business with you as an equal partner. And to completely reconfigure the relationship in a much more equal way. But that's going to require pretty different business models. But the good news is at least the regulation is kind of tipping the scales in a better direction.
Interesting, by the way, that you also had Telefonica there, because I think last year on the stage, Kieran, you might remember, we had a gentleman, John, I can't remember his second name now. We're on first name terms. From Telefonica, he was very passionate about changing their outlook on personal data usage and ownership and the like. Yeah. So, and putting users in control. That was fascinating. Okay, we've got a gentleman over here.
Yeah, my name is Muhammad Yassin.
Actually, if you don't stand up, because I think you might block the camera view,
okay.
And we'll only see the back of your head.
Don't worry. Muhammad Yassin from Italy. I'm featured at the University of Udine, but I have finished my PhD there. My question is that you mentioned that this digital ranking is not a Western thing, but when I see that a continent is left behind. I see in Africa you have just tackled South African MTN. What are the reasons behind that? Is it because governments and the governance system there is corrupted? Is it because of the oppression and suppression of expression of interest, or is it because of the violence, because of the using the privacy as an excuse for security reasons, or is it just because you are just starting and you will be including the other African countries within this digital ranking?
That is a fabulous question, and thank you very much for that question. So our selection criteria was based on a couple of things. One is, it relates to your last reason that you cite. We have limited resources. we can only evaluate 22 companies at the moment. And in terms of the map, those are the countries where the companies are headquartered. So actually, for example, Orange is operating all over Africa. Airtel is also all over Africa. So in a way, it's capturing that indirectly. But there aren't many global telcos that are headquartered in African countries other than, I think, basically MTN in South Africa is the only one in terms of sub-Saharan Africa so far. However, I would point out that our methodology is openly available. And there's an NGO that's actually based here in Paris called Internet Sans Frontières that has taken our methodology and applied it to telcos operating specifically in Kenya and I believe it's Senegal. And so we're encouraging people who want to evaluate telcos that are sort of the operating, because in those countries, there are not homegrown telcos other than, you know, former state telcos, which we don't look at because we're looking at publicly listed companies. But we welcome people to take our methodology and evaluate more companies, and then we can also publicize those results. So in part, our goal was to select, because we had limited resources, we continue to have limited resources, we wanted to select companies that have a global reach. And MTN was the only sub-Saharan African telco headquartered there that has a global reach. But there are many subsidiaries of many international telecommunications companies that operate, obviously, across the region. And there are starting to be some other organizations that they're evaluating them. But in part, we just realized we can't do everything ourselves, so we're trying to keep our methodology open so more people can evaluate more companies.
The gentleman over there.
Yes, Chris Schubert, former Secretary of State, now back to business, to my previous life. And I have two simple questions. So the first question is regarding GDPR and actually about the new legislation which is now on the table on the European level. I mean e-privacy. What is your opinion on that legislation act? Because it's generates quite a lot of confusions because GDPR is quite difficult anyway, but having on top of that e-privacy, it's quite difficult moment. And the second question, your methodology compared to the DESI index, Digital Economy Society Index, the European Digital Index, yes, how you would differentiate both indexes? So actually, those two questions to cover.
So I guess the second question, the DESI index is looking more at economies rather than corporate entities. So it's looking more at the nation level. And we evaluate companies. So that's the primary difference, is that we're not giving an evaluation to a particular nation state. We're giving an evaluation to a company. So how we evaluate Facebook or Twitter or Google isn't an evaluation of the United States per se. Other than that, there's obviously some connections between the two, but it's not an evaluation of the country. So and the e-privacy law, you put me on the spot there. There is obviously confusion, there's debate, and I'm not prepared to sort of get into a big analysis kind of on the spot right now. But privacy advocates, feel that it is necessary. We'll again kind of see how it pans out. There may well be, I think there are things that companies are hoping to get away with under GDPR that the e-privacy law would not let them get away with. So that might help in a sense. But I'm afraid I'd have to sort of, I'm not totally in a position on the spot to do a detailed analysis other than that. Privacy laws that hold companies accountable are, we've seen kind of in our global analysis, very necessary. And so, for instance, South Korea, one other reason why Kakao does so well is they have strong privacy laws. So these laws, regulation is necessary, but we also need to make sure that regulation is carried out with a thorough evaluation of its impact, kind of more broadly. So if your primary objective is security or whatever it is, what other rights are being affected and what impact are you having on the global system is always a question to be asking.
Sorry, I'm going to do something slightly unusual, which is to chip in again. I know we've got lots of other questions,
Sure.
but just as a follow-up almost to that, why are you getting responsiveness from the companies?
We are.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we are. In fact, there have been several companies that have issued public statements about their performance. So that's been interesting. There are other companies who told us privately they were disappointed. There are other companies.
Can you say which ones?
Well, I can tell you because Apple has told us they're disappointed in their evaluation, and while they have a lot of strong privacy protective practices on specific things, there are other things they don't disclose to their users, even if they might talk to privacy experts about it. And on freedom of expression, they're quite poor. They have no clear commitment. And the removal of content on app stores and so on, it's very untransparent. So yeah.
Thank you. The lady at the back there.
Yes. My name is Laura Yurgesh. I'm from Kazakhstan. Thank you so much for your presentation. You're talking about digital rights project. My question is there some norms or concepts of digital worlds? And if it is not so, who is responsible, or maybe who are the main stakeholders who could be participate in this? And as a continuation of your project, I think maybe, do you see any response from governmental, from grassroots initiative, or what kind of approach you
Sure.
could have?
Yeah, so digital rights, the reason why we use the word digital rights is because if we say human rights, people assume that we're also talking about labor rights and other offline rights that don't relate to use of digital technology. But digital rights, really, this is an extension of human rights as articulated by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Freedom of expression, privacy, they're both in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They're in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And this is just a translation of fundamental human rights that already have broad global consensus onto the internet and onto obligations of companies. And the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights clearly articulates what companies' obligations, basically companies' minimal obligations are in relation to human rights. In terms of fora where these things are discussed, there's the Internet Governance Forum, which was a UN-sponsored annual gathering. You mentioned you're from Mongolia. Actually, the Mongolian government is a member of the Freedom Online Coalition, which is a coalition of governments that have made commitments to a free and open internet. And some of us are engaging with those governments and trying to push them a bit more to be a little bit less inconsistent about how they apply these principles at home, as well as around the world. But yeah, those are examples of ways to engage. And civil society is quite engaged in these issues, and there are quite a number of groups that have taken our data and are using our data and analysis to advocate both for policy change and also to advocate to companies to make changes.
Okay, we actually have run out of time, unless you have a very short question. Is it short?
It's a short.
It's really short?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're promising me short?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, go.
Okay, so my name is Ahmed. I'm an interviewer. I'm from Germany, a software engineer, and now turning to be an entrepreneur.
Great.
So you mentioned the telcos. So most of telcos, maybe Vodafone and Orange, are working on the non-democratic countries. So is that part of the rating? I mean, probably they have to do some other non-transparent things. So is that's reflected in the rating?
So the way we evaluate these global multinational telcos is we look at their global group level policies in terms of their basic commitments, impact assessment, transparency reporting. And then when it comes to their privacy policies in terms of service, those types of policies, we look at what they're doing in their home market, just because we don't have the resources to look at all the different operating companies. But this is, again, where having an open methodology has been helpful, because Internet Sans Frontières has taken, and also the social media exchange based in Lebanon, they took part of our methodology and evaluated companies all across the Arab region, and including many subsidiaries of Vodafone and Orange, and found them to be doing more poorly than at home, which is not a big shock, but they had very specific data to compare. So yeah, it's definitely inconsistent, and in a way, we're just trying to provide an initial framework for research and data, and we hope many more organizations will add to that data.
Thank you. I'm sure everyone will agree it's a fabulous start. And thank you very much to Rebecca. If we could give her a warm round of applause. Thank you. And thank you also to our audience. We have another talk starting in about, 20 minutes? Something like that. I forget the timings, right? And so please do stay with us for that and return. It's about the work environment and architecture in the work environment. It promises to be fascinating. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Pas pour la poster, avec ça va démarrer avec la dernière session, là, parce que c'est des titres super. C'est pas une photo. Tu l'as branché comment ton VP là? Parce que tu as très peu de décalage labial en fait. Parce que c'est vraiment très fort aussi. Je sais pas. Non, mais c'est vrai, je me faisais la réflexion, parce que au moment où je regarde l'écran, je me dis, c'est